so I guess everyone feels that they win if they survive.
Welcome to the Classic Adventure Gaming Podcast. This is finally episode 11, and it's good to be back behind the mic. Yeah, I know it's been a hot minute since our last episode. My apologies for the delay, but I promise the wait will have been worth it, as the details in this episode are incredibly valuable. So let's catch up on some classic adventure gaming news to get started. First off, Fight On Magazine has returned again with issue 16. It's absolutely a banger, packed with wild tables, crazy art, and all the raw inspiration that we know and love. Next, huge news here. Mythmere Games is preparing the Osric 3.0 crowdfunding launch on May 6th through BackerKit. Head over to Mythmere Games' website for all the details. This is a big one, ladies and gentlemen. You do not want to miss out. The Discord has been buzzing lately. We've had some great conversations and new faces. So if you're not in there yet, now's a great time to hop in. And then on my end, I've been keeping busy preparing for North Texas RPG Con happening in June. Tickets for the event are sold out, but if you're near the DFW area or don't mind driving too far, they will have walk-up ticket purchases available. As for today's episode, it's a real deep dive. Melan, EOTB, Zherbus, and Josh go into all the things about the Thief, how to play them, how to DM for them, and how to get the most out of a class that's often been misunderstood, underused, or adjudicated poorly. So grab your lockpicks and your climbing gear, and let's jump into it with the boys.
Alrighty, so why don't we go ahead and start off? Melan, would you mind kind of giving us maybe like a brief overview on like kind of what the Thief is, its role within the party? Just kind of start off with a brief overview of what the Thief is.
Oh, sure. This is sort of a topic close to my heart. My first AD&D character who had a name was a thief. So Balthazar the Silent, you are remembered. And I would say in AD&D, one of the things about a thief is to first start with what it is not. It is not the useless light armored fighter that a lot of people perceive it as and play it as. In the role of the thief, I believe that you are playing a sort of a specialist who is good at targeted action. He is a character who is sort of excellent in niche activities. The fighter, the cleric, those are more general purpose. The magic user is a bit more niche, and the thief is sort of, once again, somebody who works as best when he is doing jobs for the other players or the other characters. And you are sort of working through a loop where you first observe, then you assess the risks and opportunities, and finally act decisively. And as a thief, you work the best when you are cutting through problems at angles where you are very efficient. You are sort of targeting not the strong points, but the weak points of a thing. Otherwise, you should probably generally play support, because you are sort of a fragile character. You shouldn't get into sort of direct one-on-one confrontations. That's not your forte. You are a thief. You should act like one. So you should act like an opportunist. You should engage in recon in the dungeon, but also in more broad social settings like cities. And you should focus on getting rich. To round this up, there is a sort of, in the Hungarian old school scene, we even have a term called orasztészing, which means, I don't necessarily recommend this. This is sort of fetching small objects during recon and sort of converting it into experience points without the other players sort of benefiting. This is named after a player, not a character. So that's about it.
Alrighty, awesome. So why don't we open up Zerb, EOTB? What do y'all think about that, and what would you maybe add kind of to just establishing, what the thief is?
I think Melan nailed it, like absolutely bang on. They're a support. They fill in the gaps that aren't easy for other classes to fill. And even if they can, they generally do the jobs better. There's a few things that you can think of that would kind of fill in the role, like if somebody had slippers of spider climbing, then they can climb the walls, right? They can get over obstacles and stuff. Or if you had a cleric with a fine trap spell going on, then that also kind of fills in some of the gap. So a party can get by without a thief, but it's a lot better, and it actually saves them a lot more resources if they have a thief. But conversely, the thief isn't going to be your primary combatants. They're generally not going to be the one in the front line. They're going to be providing support at best in combat situations. The only exception would be is if they act just like Melan said as an opportunist, and they get a good backstab off somebody and eliminate a target that maybe a sentry was standing guard somewhere or something. So they've come to be a core member of a party, and because a party's goal should be to operate as optimally as far as burning resources as possible. And a thief is kind of like a well of dealing with those resources. It's not to say that they're not without dangers. If a glyph goes off, or a fire trap goes off, or a standard trap goes off, usually it's the thief that ends up taking it in the face. But as far as when you're talking about going through 15 to 20 rooms, the thieves save a lot of resources, even at the cost of time, right?
Yeah, I think that the cost of time bit is where it really hits how thieves are going to be used and play most right on the head. Um, they have powers that make it doing things that you're going to do in the dungeon anyway happen much faster, such as opening up locks or doors, or and much more quietly. Their job is to neutralize obstacles, um, and keep the party moving forward. And also in their scout role, I mean, they're not the only ones who can scout, but they're frequently uh, used as scouts. They can help a party avoid spending lots of time going down paths that don't look fruitful by quickly checking out. If there's three options on where to go, okay, well, the thief can shoot down the hallway a little bit of each one, and let people know if one of them looks more valuable than others. And kind of lastly, I would say that if you look at how traps and various environmental hazards that cause saving throw rolls to be set up, a lot of times in the old materials, you'll see that they are forcing a saving throw versus petrification. And that is where the thief is best. So even a first level thief, if they have a high dexterity, they can have a saving throw versus petrification that succeeds on like an 8 or higher if they have an 18. So they are built to negotiate all of these obstacles and keep parties moving forward. And then when fights happen, yeah, they're not attacking every round, but they're finishing off those weak points, as was mentioned.
Okay, so why don't we kind of also establish how is the thief going to be played and kind of change through the early game, into the mid game and then like higher levels? What should players expect, and how does the thief kind of change over time?
I think that in my campaigns, well played thieves, how they change over time is that they become much more valuable in the city. They start to get networks of informants. They start to be building towards that point where they're going to launch a takeover attempt of the Thieves Guild, or start one if there isn't one there. So the main thing is how they become that gray market resource. The parties ticket into the underworld, uh, not the mythic underworld, but just the regular human criminal underworld of large urban areas, and help them negotiate that. That's the biggest change I see over time.
That's kind of what I had on my notepad here as well. Is that once you establish yourself in the setting, you start getting in contact with the underworld, and you will basically also play the role of intermediary for the other characters, the party. You are the guy who can get stuff for them, get information, get rumors about adventures. This is not a sort of a mechanical issue. This is more of your role in the campaign. On the early level, though, you play quite a lot like a general adventure, because your skills are pretty bad at that. So the risk of failure is very large. So just like a fighter shouldn't act completely like Conan yet, or magic user shouldn't sling spells left and right. You are better off sort of avoiding situations that force rolls, and solves things by relying on items or general adventuring skills. But as you get up into the higher levels, your abilities become a lot more reliable, and you can basically very reliably stealth, especially with the right magic items that sort of put you out of reach of quite a lot of encounters you might find in the game. You don't have to touch them. You can just observe, or sort of size up the situation, and then report back to the kill team, who will come in and deal with it.
Yeah, when you're early level and you're lucky enough to discover a trap, and you know they only have a 30% chance of disarming the trap, that's when there's typically going to try to be more negotiation on getting past that trap, triggering it without suffering the effects of it. But as you get into the mid levels, where you have a pretty good shot of just bypassing the trap, that's when the game overall, and not just with thieves, that becomes a little bit more fast and furious. You can see that with parties when they get access to continual light, for example. They don't have to track torch times as strictly, right? So you have skills that are a little bit more reliable but not guaranteed. There's still room for failure. Their skill set branches out to be more useful, but their combat abilities, other than getting a backstab, is still going to be pretty weak compared to anybody else. So they're generally, I've had most of my mid-level thieves, they tend to not do a whole lot during combat unless they can, right? They'll engage in missile fire when they're able. They'll get a backstab off if they're able, but in between those moments, they're going to be very efficiently doing a lot of scouting, taking care of a lot of traps, scaling over walls, checking out areas the rest of the party can't get to, gathering information, providing access overall for the rest of the party. And then once you get to high level, of course, not only are you still being able to do that with a very high degree of success, but you're also you're the conduit into the rest of the world that the party isn't privy to, right? Just like EOTB went into with the criminal underworld. You start making contacts. You have people that you deal with on the regular. There is a little bit more political strife at hand, and then eventually, you enter the game of the guild, right? So they have a pretty active arch from early levels all the way to late levels. It's just not the same way that you commonly think of for like a fighter or a magic user or even a cleric.
And also, I mean, I would throw out that thieves are one of, I mean, we just talked about them as if they were a single classed character, but thieves are commonly the character class that is combined with something else most frequently, whether that's because it's a demi-human and it's a straight multi-class, or even thieves tend to really go well with dual classing with humans also, because there's a lot of classes out there for which having a high dexterity is synergistic. If you're a magic user, how many people, if they have 2 good scores and they're a magic user, do they put 1 in dexterity? If you're an illusionist, you have to put 1 in dexterity. If you're a fighter and you want to focus mainly on sniping or missile shots, you're going to put in dexterity. So another thing with thieves on how they change is that they can go in a lot of different directions if you want to combine them with another class. And if you're somebody who doesn't like having more moments where you're kind of backing up the party instead of taking a more active role in whatever the party is doing, especially with combat and things like that, then dual classing or multi-classing your thief is a no-brainer, because you're still going to be able to do everything a thief does and combine it with being functional in that second area that you feel the gameplay is missing towards.
And there's no level limits.
Yeah, and there's no level limits, yes.
Okay, awesome. Does anyone have any more kind of words on that, or
I
why don't we go?
think we got it.
Awesome. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and maybe get a little bit more granular here, and why don't we go over the 1E thief skills and maybe give some explanations where we think the explanations are needed. I know there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of different information around stuff like moving quietly, opening locks, finding traps, that kind of stuff. So maybe we can kind of talk about that and clarify some stuff for people.
I was going to start with picking pockets. Isn't just picking pockets. It doesn't have to be just picking pockets, right? I would say that if you're trying to loose a key off a guard, then that's a pretty obvious way to enable pickpockets. But if you have kind of one of those like Indiana Jones situations, you have the weighted thing, but you have the object that you want to take. Like I would, in a pinch, I'd be more apt to give a sleight of hand to picking pockets. I'm not sure everybody agrees with that, but as far as like a misconception, open locks is pretty standard. I don't think that there's a lot of misconceptions that can come with that. Finding and removing traps. This is probably where you can start getting into failing isn't catastrophic with thief skills. So, you try to remove a trap. That doesn't mean you set it off and it blows up in your face and you die. That means that you've located the trap and you've tried to disable it, but you couldn't. You don't get another shot at it, but the trap is still there, right? And maybe they don't know it, but it's not an automatic, there's a poison gas trap and they're trying to disarm it and then they fail. That means that it's like those shows with their bombs where they're clipping the wrong wires, and then it blows up because, timer ran. Moving silently is 2 things. It's exactly what it sounds like. It increases your chances of surprise, and it's necessary for a backstab. And I think that sometimes gets conflated with what Hide and Shadows does, which Hide and Shadows is more of like, this is where we get into the area where thieves are doing things that other people can't do, right? So if you have a magic user that's like hiding under a desk in a dark room, that's not the same as Hide and Shadows, whereas Hide and Shadows makes them virtually invisible, right? If they are in a legitimate shadowy area and they're able to successfully hide, then basically it's almost guaranteed that they're not going to be seen. Of course, detective visibility and true seeing, it will see them or whatever. hearing noise is a whole other ball of yarn, because that does take a lot of time. It takes a tenth of a turn, and sometimes you can't rely on it. I think that I've had some players that they think that if there's something in the room, that hearing noise is definitely going to hear it. I mean, if the creature or people in there aren't doing anything to make noise, then it's not a guarantee. It's like, well, you hear something breathing on the other side. You don't necessarily get that level of granularity with hearing noise, but I would say that as far as anybody that's pacing around a room, or there's a monster that's eating the leg of some creature or something like that, that they'll be able to hear. Yeah, you hear crunching and lip smacking. And then the other like hiding in shadows, almost supernatural ability is climbing walls. That's not just climbing. It's not like rock cliff climbing. That's scaling some really unnatural terrains, right? That's climbing up on a smooth stone wall, getting over a spike trap pit, to go check out to see what's on beyond it. And the same thing with read languages is that's resulted in some information in the game, even though it's a pretty low chance until you get higher level. That's resulted in some information that I didn't think the players are going to get, that they've been able to surmise with reading languages.
Yeah, this fits into the discussion that these are basically mostly extraordinary abilities. So there is a sort of level, which we will discuss in one of the subsequent questions, that non-thief characters can move quietly or hide under a desk or in a dark room or whatever. But what the thief does is something beyond that. It's an extraordinary ability, and this is how it should be interpreted as by the game master as well. That sort of failure states are not necessarily fatal or highly damaging, and even if the thief ability roll does not work out, it is still possible to fall back on the less efficient methods, like a thief can also hide under the desk if hiding in shadows does not work out.
Yeah, I think that it's as far as the what happens when a thief roll fails thing, I think it's very important that DMs just train themselves mentally to think, if the thief roll fails, then whatever a normal person would achieve in this circumstance is what the thief is achieving, and not go to a failure state. So I would echo on that. As far as the individual thief abilities themselves, I guess I would say that pickpockets, Zerb touched on, this can also be used for sleight of hand. It can be used for anything where you're playing keep away or whatever. Anything that would require a lot of quick hands to accomplish, you can default to pickpockets. But it is the thief ability that I think is most underused, because a lot of DMs don't design the tables or what have you for how they would handle it if the thief got something and they don't want to deal with it, and so it just kind of doesn't get used. But in reality, pickpocket should be something that the failure rate is pretty low. The catastrophic failure rate is pretty low. If the thief fails the pickpockets, that doesn't mean that the target noticed anything. Even if they do notice anything, the thief is probably going to be able to run away, right? So it should be one of those calculated risks that is an easy way for a thief to make a little bit of extra money. It's also a way for you to introduce things into the campaign, little bits and bobs, like a treasure map or something like that, or some little cursed item, etc. Keep in mind that, I mean, most of the time it should be that they're just getting a little bit of money or what have you, maybe some small thing that they could sell. But it should be ability that a thief character can dip into fairly frequently for some small benefit to themselves, and occasionally a benefit to the entire party. You know, the finding traps. The only point that I would add on to that would be that if if the finding traps roll fails, of course, like Zerb said, it doesn't go off. So then it just defaults back to what do people do if there is no thief? And so as a DM, you do kind of want to have some vague idea about how the trap works. It doesn't have to be detailed. You don't spend an hour on it, but just know, like, okay, so this is a trap where a spear is chucked out of a hole in the wall that's on some sort of a spring or whatever, so that if people do default back to trying to take something apart manually, you have a quick way to address, like, okay, well, what you're doing is actually interacting with how the mechanism works, so you can negotiate that trap. For moving silently and hide in shadows, to echo what other people said, those are preternatural abilities. So the way that I would think about it is that if someone is successfully hidden in shadows, that defeats active searching, which is what differentiates it from someone who is just trying to hide, who is not a thief. Someone who's trying to hide who is not a thief is depending upon the other party that they are hiding from not looking in that area. A thief is not worried about that. If the thief succeeds in his ability, the other party can be looking in that area, and unless they can completely remove the shadow somehow, the thief will not be found. The thief will be able to move around within that shadow such to, avoid being touched, etc. It's just effectively a preternatural, like, unless you can get rid of the darkness, you won't be able to get your hands on me. You won't know for sure where I'm at. And it's a very powerful ability that shouldn't be nerfed very hard.
One qualifier there is that the things that apply to invisibility also apply here. So some creatures might have a sense of smell or some sort of supernatural ability to detect life or whatever in the area, and those might still work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm just thinking more of like the City Watch. That was
Sure,
my
sure,
mental frame of reference.
And so I guess one thing I know Zerb said it was pretty cut and dry, and I think in a lot of ways it is. But for open locks, is that something y'all see as basically you're trying to pick a lock? If you fail, you're unable to pick it, until maybe you like level or something, or do you allow people to take multiple attempts at picking locks?
The rules are pretty specific. That says that you can't try that lock until you've gained a level.
Oh yeah. That's my understanding as well.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, you would just have people sit and try it forever until they got it. So on some of that stuff, like, it has to be one and done, or else you would never have somebody breaking down a door, because it would always be easier to just let the thief take 3 shots at the lock.
Well, but on the other hand, you can also fall back on attacking the door with other methods. You can take off the hinges, break it, you try to crowbar it open, find an alternate way in, use your knock spell that you don't have too many of, but you might have one. So there are still options. The thief,
With the old
the
stone shape.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Warped wood, if the door is wooden or what have you. The issue is that the thief can just bypass that with a simple roll under a few rounds.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say on thief abilities that just came to me is, I don't know if people have ever seen this in pictures that kind of cross the internet feeds, but if you've ever seen like goats like way the hell up, like on a cliff, essentially, where it looks like there's no way that a goat should be able to get up there, but they're up there anyway. Have that picture in mind when you're thinking about thieves and climb walls, because that's really to kind of just add on to what Zerb was saying. They're even better than that.
Thieves are goated.
Yep.
And that warp wood stone shaped kind of comment, that kind of feeds into what we came from before, is that like there's ways for the party to deal with these situations. It's just that the thieves a lot better at it, as far as saving party resources, right? So like the primary party resources being time, hit points, spells. These spend it in different ways, you know.
Okay, sweet. So why don't we go ahead? I think that was a really good explanation of the thief skills and everything. We did kind of touch a little bit on adjudicating non-thieves attempting thief skills. And this might kind of dovetail into just, adjudicating stealth and surprise in general. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about that. How do we typically adjudicate non-thieves attempting thief skills? Or at least attempting to do the same things that a thief would, like, trying to hide, stay hidden from something. How would you usually adjudicate that?
Well, I tend to default to for things that rely on interactions with other people or them noticing you or something of that sort. I do tend to leverage the surprise mechanic, because to me surprise is the closest thing one has to a perception check. um the point is that, do you notice this thing? I did not notice it. I am surprised by it. So given how like in the DMG, it talks about that if someone surprises someone else, then they can get away without the person who was surprised even knowing that they were there. That to me tends to lend right into, like, okay, so if if a non-thief is trying to do things like hide or quietly walk down a hallway without alerting people who might be in rooms on either side or something to that effect, then I will just tend to default to that mechanic. So if a thief fails his role, then I will tend to check on that basis. Like, okay, so they weren't preternaturally quiet or hidden. So I'll just give the other person a surprise check and see if they notice them anyway. With traps, like it comes down to, then you're just then having to describe how you interact with this trap. Hear noise is kind of like a clairaudience spell, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's a slightly nerfed clairaudience spell that thieves can do all the time. So if they succeed, then you just give them most of the information that someone like that a magic user would get from the third level spell clairaudience, absent whatever muffling the door would provide, because the clairaudience is of course centered right, like inside the room, and you're on the other side of it, so it's not going to be as efficient. So, but hear noise is an example of one quote unquote thief skill that everybody has. Everybody has the hear noise skill. It's just the thieves are the only ones that improve at it. So anybody can use hear noise. Like with the racial bonuses if you're non-human, and then of course there's the infamous keen ears check, where if you succeed at your very first hear noise opportunity, then you have a further +5 bonus for the rest of the game because you have keen ears, which is one of those little Easter eggs in 1E that I love.
My rule of thumb for these situations, and not just in the case of thieves, is to come from the understanding that an adventurer is generally somebody like a trained scout, somebody who is well-rounded, competent, and capable of basically stuff like a scout, a good Boy Scout would be good at. So as long as they can manage with environmental logic, using the context to their advantage, and player skill, that's an ability to replicate, well, maybe not the truly effective thief abilities, which are sort of extraordinary, but to sort of behave as a sort of thief light, to solve problems to a certain extent, and that means adopting the thief mindset. So you must be mobile, exploit weaknesses, have a getaway plan. This is something that you don't have to do on the mechanical level, the level of the concrete rules. You will not have the same success rate as thieves, but you can try. Obviously, if the context is that you are clad in plate mail and you are trying to get past a sentry, that's not really going to work that well.
Yeah, one other thing I would just mention in terms of specifics that some people have asked about is climb walls. Like, how do people who aren't thieves climb walls? Well, that's why there's grappling hooks and ropes in the game, right? So I mean, what makes the thief awesome is they can just walk right up to a sheer surface and start going, and they don't need to have something at the top to hook onto. Well, if you're not a thief, then you do need those things, right? Like you do need something at the top to hook onto that is within the range of the rope that you can throw, and you're going to have to, try and hit that thing that you can hook onto. So you're probably gonna have to make an attack roll, and it's noisy when you do that. So if something's around, then there is the chance. Once again, a surprise roll is what I would use, that they hear that. But it's still possible for you to throw that rope and hook into something because you succeeded in a to hit roll of whatever AC that I think is appropriate for the circumstance, or whatever fiat chance I would assign, and that nothing around notices that. And then you have a secure rope that you can just climb up. That's entirely possible too. But a thief can just walk up and make a roll that is 85% at level 1. So, but they're not the only ones who can climb walls.
The DMG gives guidance on, you already touched on this, but on page 60, there's a chart for the racial hearing noises. And that's where that keen hearing rule is. So you can actually stack up multiple characters to go listen to a door. But like you said, the thieves are the only ones that just naturally get better at it, right? Everybody else is just going to have that chance forever. As far as the other stuff, and we're kind of dovetailing into stealth or being detected as a non-thief, is that DMG page 68 has guidance on light, noise, and odors. So you can see right from that chart right there that if you got characters in metal armor, they can be heard for 90 feet. Hard boots can be heard for 60 feet. It gives a little bit of guidance on light and odors too. So you can surmise whether these people would be heard to begin with, or whether maybe it was just a thief and a magic user, and they weren't trying to move stealthily, but maybe they wouldn't be making as much noise because they don't have people clanging around in plate mail or whatever. And then that's when you can get into surprise, right?
Okay, awesome. And why don't we use that just as a way to segue into talking about surprise? So, would y'all mind just giving kind of an overview just of how you view surprise, when you're using it, and kind of what its implications are?
Okay, so surprise isn't necessarily stealth. It's basically the chance to notice what's going on or be caught flat-footed, right? The surprise itself circumvents stealth when an attack is initiated. Surprise can only be attempted outside of hearing ranges to me. So that kind of you could determine encounter distance, right? But you have to roll for surprise, and if you get surprise, then you got up close. But if you have something that's planted in a room, and you got 3 guys in plate mail playing down, then I wouldn't be keen on giving you a surprise bonus on that. As a matter of fact, they're probably already aware of you if you're clanging down the hallway, and a lot of that's predicated on just thinking about the acoustics and the guidance that the DMG gives you on the rule. Now, being able to move quietly, moving carefully, that will enable surprise, then that's great, because then you get the jump on them, you catch them off flat-footed. Like I use surprises more of like a status rather than kind of convoluting the surprise segments with your return actions. So that means that they get a surprised individual can be attacked per segment for a full round's attack. They don't have the benefit of a shield or dexterity, and that's the surprise status, right? But if you talk about the chance of surprising, if you take out the equation of certain monsters that have special chances, or you take out the equation that rangers can only be surprised, 1/6 the less of the time, and they surprise, more often. If you take those things out of the equation on any given party, then it dovetails very nicely into stealth that if you are unheard and unseen, if you are technically invisible or virtually invisible, if in terms of hide and shadows go, um, that there's support in the AD&D books that says if you are approaching your the other party silently, you get +1. And if you are approaching them invisibly, you get +1, so that you can boost your 2 and 6 chance to a 4 and 6 chance of surprise. And 4 surprise segments is it's a big jump. Now in other systems, if we walk out of AD&D land, that's a full that you get a full round basically of surprise in a lot of the other systems. But in AD&D, 4 segments, especially with such a close range of what the encounter distance would be, is super punishing.
Yeah, I think that for surprise, in addition to what Zerb hit on, is I would just reiterate that remember that if you surprise something, if you desire to leave without being seen, the rules generally will let you do that. Uh, that's supposed to be kind of the default scenario. So a thief or any other character who has the ability to increase the amount of segments that someone else is surprised, there's a dual whammy going on with surprise. So you make a surprise roll. The number that you roll tells you if you are or are not surprised. But if you are surprised, it also tells you how long you are surprised. So that's why having the surprise range uh, go up from 2 and 6 to 3 and 6 to 4 and 6, or to whatever number, is exponentially powerful. Because if you are invisible and silent, and so you surprise on 4 and 6, well, not only does somebody have a greater chance of being surprised, but they have a greater chance of being surprised for a longer period of time. So it has a very synergistic effect. I mean, if you can get more information, you can get back safely because you surprise them, and so you just nope out of it. And that is really, for thieves especially, how they should primarily be using surprise if they're not backstabbing, is to nope out of things that they are encountering in advance of the party. They're getting the information that will help the party deal with it in the best way, with knowledge of the situation, at no risk to the thief itself, because they noped out. So in terms of using surprise, that's the primary way that I see thieves interacting with it.
That especially happens a lot outdoors, because the outdoor encounter tables can be pretty harsh. And being able to be like, oh no, that's like 70 knolls over the grassy knoll. We probably don't want to fight with that. And, but they got surprised and they're like, well, let's nope out.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, elves excel in that outdoor setting also. Elves and halflings. So who happen to make excellent thieves.
Alrighty, and then I did want to. So, Zerb, you have a really good blog article up that kind of goes over how you adjudicate stealth. It seems like you have a pretty solid system that you like to refer to for it. Would you mind like sharing that, and then maybe other people can kind of jump in and add how they go about kind of developing their stealth system, or at least talking about how they think about stealth?
So basically, mine is I had touched on this prior, in that there's guidance, particularly on page 68 of the DMG, that talks about light, noise, and odors, right? So if you know how far things are away from each other in the dungeon, you have a pretty clear idea if the paladin and the fighter, with their shields bouncing off of their breastplates and stuff, are making enough noise that things will be aware of them. Like every room in the dungeon isn't like a completely encapsulated little thing that is completely unaware of everything that's going on around it. Likewise, combat will tend to attract things that are within hearing distance, right? So a lot of that stuff is extrapolated from the light, noise, and odors section, as well as the hearing noise section on page 60. And then, of course, on the surprise rules and what can adjust the surprise chance up or down. The blog article is just a very long way of talking about how I internalize that and giving a lot of examples. It also touches a bit on line of sight too, so that if something is deep inside a crater and as a character that's further away from the edge of the crater, that creature will not be able to see that because you can do simple geometry to see that his line of sight is not going to see that character. But often when players are interacting with the game and they're mapping the dungeon, sometimes it's hard for them to think beyond the 2 dimensions. So it's kind of good for yourself to internalize that well, they wouldn't be able to see him, or they may or may not be able to hear him. But using that guidance, you can kind of you can kind of codify it for your own games. But I would say that the guidance in the DMG pretty much fills in, I would say, most every gap.
Okay, awesome. Does anyone else have anything they want to tag onto that?
Oh, sure. My approach beyond even the general level of the rules is to sort of look at stealth as a system. This is a skill and sort of mindset that I picked up from Save the Dark Project, which is a great computer game about playing a thief.
I love that game.
Yeah, and actually it's fairly deeply rooted in AD&D, and not just AD&D, but Thieves Guild, which was a very old AD&D variant specifically focused on sci-fi gameplay. And the way it works is that it sort of looks at it stealth as a system where you have sliding fail states and you have audio visual cues that inform you. So as you move through the environment, you might get sort of further and further away from being hidden and sort of stealthy and closer to discovery. So a guard might first, just notice, was that a noise over there? Must have been rats. And hey, over there, is there somebody over there? And from then it goes to help, somebody is attacking us, or whatever it might be. And you can sort of incorporate this system into your game as well, sort of constantly feeding players information as they hear noises, they see light, and make informed decisions on that basis. Now, this is a bit sort of bubble-like in dungeons where the environment is typically a bit compartmentalized. But it becomes particularly relevant in cities and other sort of complex sites like infiltrating a castle or espionage or other kinds of sci-fi adventures, where this sort of balance or sliding scale becomes sort of a key of being successful at stealth or unsuccessful at stealth. And it is something that as a GM, you can sort of continuously use to sort of inform your players and also assess the threat level, the sort of the enemy response to directions in the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I would tie onto that. I think that most DMs are way too punishing on quote unquote stealth failures. Just like I'd say occasionally on Melee to remind people that the game is not calibrated to the adventurers. The game is calibrated to the 0 level man-at-arms. Stealth is calibrated to, normal people too. And your average city guard that hears something, well, now granted, in a sword and sorcery world, it's going to be something a little bit more often than it would be in our own experience, but still 90 times out of 100 or 9 times out of 10, I guess, that's usually nothing. And so that's why in the fiction, the guards often tend not to follow up on minor, glitches on the part of the person who is stealthy trying to be stealthy that isn't perfectly stealthy, because the guards are normal people who if they followed up hyper vigilantly on every anomaly, would just find themselves most of the time following up on nothing. So until something is egregious, they tend to default and presume to, oh, that's probably nothing, I don't want to bother myself with it. So for player thieves, if something about the circumstances of the dice don't indicate an egregious situation, then often with stealth, I will adjudicate it in a similar way to climb walls, where a failure doesn't mean that you drop to the ground and take damage. It means that you've discovered that the path that you were attempting to climb, you can't continue forward. So you're going to have to go back, climb down, and find another way. And same thing with stealth, that you may not be discovered, but it becomes clear to you that if you were to continue trying to stealth your way forward along this path, that you would be, and so you need to go back and find another way. I think that is much more in line with the spirit of the game than you failed a roll, you are seen, draw your dagger, you are now in combat.
Yeah, it is kind of important to keep in mind that most opponents that the players are going to face are not going to be ruthless and very competent optimizers. They might meet some of their people, like highly trained assassins or rival adventurers, and that's very scary. But most of the time, we could say you should not be simulating a military genius, complete artificial intelligence, but artificial stupidity, artificial boredom, artificial incompetence. So there will be laxness, there will be security gaps. And the beauty of being a thief is finding those gaps and exploiting them to your benefit.
Yeah, and if it was a non-thief who was trying to stealth in the situation I just described, they probably would be seen, right? Instead of it being a situation where the thief just became aware that if they continued forward along this path, that they would be seen. Instead, a non-thief would not get the benefit of the doubt. So that's kind of another way that you can keep it consistent with the fiction and make thieves feel more thiefly, so to speak.
Perfect. Okay, that's great information. Yeah, you definitely don't hear about that at all enough. So I'm super, super excited to be able to get that out. Okay, well, why don't we just do also, so let's go ahead and just do a quick maybe comparison. The assassin class is definitely distinct, but I think we can definitely cover it here. Maybe compare it to the thief and see how it kind of operates as an advanced class from the thief. Maybe some of what the differences are, stuff you would consider when, DMing for an assassin versus a thief or playing them.
Well, one of the things that people don't consider with assassin is the access to what an assassin can use compared to a thief. On the surface, people just will see that assassins have worse thief skills, but they also have the ability to use the assassination. But they also, if you look at what the equipment that they can use, it brings them almost more in line with more of a fighter. But also, there's a lot to be said about being able to use poisons and engage in assassin-like activities. Both of them, as far as in my games, they definitely fulfill a similar role as far as how they engage in the world. It's not the same role, but it's a similar role where they're both party viewpoints into the criminal underworld. But they also interact with different points of that criminal.
Yeah, they are fairly fascinating class that I particularly enjoy playing or running, for sort of a more hard-edged version of the thief. You are very correct in the respect that one advantage of the assassin is that he can attack a problem from multiple angles. You have slightly better combat skills than the thief with better equipment, and you can use the assassination table. You can use the thief skills not perfectly, but to an extent, you can use poison and all that. So if you want to kill somebody, there are many ways at your disposal. And there is one more thing that's very important, that the assassin should be sort of constantly engaging, maybe not so much in dungeon expeditions, but more social settings like cities, is to adopt and use disguises effectively. Sort of like Phantomas, the super criminal who is basically a man of 1,000 faces moving through the underworld. And his one of his main skills is getting up close to the target and being unexpected. One of my players in the campaign we played with the Horde of Delusion adventure sort of didn't qualify for the ranger class, so he played an assassin masquerading as a ranger, and he was quite effective at it.
I think with assassin, it's absolutely proper, and most players will probably think of it this way. You are paying extra experience point tax to have a thief plus. So the disguise thing that Melan mentioned, very important. I mean, if you have time and in a properly run campaign, like it has some room to breathe. So players will often have time, and an assassin can investigate things using that disguise ability, and that is absolutely underrated. Not enough DMs allow it, and players don't really think about it. Often because of just the way that adventures are structured doesn't allow for it. But that's one. I mean, and then of course the classic, anytime you surprise somebody, you just get a % chance to kill them. So it's even better than a backstab in most cases. Although in some cases backstab is better, which is why assassins get to pick and choose between the 3 different methods. The third method just being regular combat. But I mean, to be able to just make a % roll to assassinate something if you surprise it and can close to it while it's surprised, that's absolutely huge. And then the third thing is, to me, that really makes the difference is that presuming that you are playing in a world where assassins guilds are a known part in a city, like the city just understands that these things exist, it's kind of in the world, and that's not something unusual. Well, then assassins are going to be able to use poison, like I think was mentioned earlier, on their weapons. And now, granted, it's not going to be appreciated by the general public, but if they're a member of an assassin's guild and their use of poisoned weapons gets noticed, then probably they're going to have an easier in and out with the justice system, slap on the wrist. We throw you in jail for the night so that people don't riot or whatever. And then you just get out the next day and you just kind of, make yourself scarce for a little bit. As opposed to a regular character, which would just be hung or something. So when you combine all of those things together, those extra capabilities are usually worth the XP tax, in my mind. If you don't want a multi-class, if you are comfortable playing a pure thief with a little bit of extra, and the use of a shield too, which is really underrated because remember, magic shields give you bonuses to your saving throws. So the ability to strap on a +5 to all of your saving throws, as well as your AC, very, very nice feature. So I do tend to like playing assassins if I want to play the thief. And when I play thieves, it's usually more with an eye towards either multi-classing it from the get-go or dual classing it and mixing in that thief capability with something else later.
Why don't we go into, so we've talked about the thief a lot, and I think kind of more from the play perspective. Why don't we take a step back and kind of look at how do you guys go about designing content with thieves in mind? This might be able to dovetail a little bit into designing, thieves and assassin missions, but maybe even for dungeons, what are things people should take into consideration so that the, thief can properly kind of integrate with the game?
I generally build my setups with Thievery as a open opportunity in mind. Maybe dungeons are less of a concrete examples, but sort of city adventures and other side-based adventures definitely follow this setup. The key is not to build environments solely for thieves, because after all you have a whole party. They have to play a part in it. This is important. And what to look for, I think, is to build security systems which have their own internal logic, and then let the players find the weak points and exploit it, which is where the thief will become very effective. It is usually wise to consider that most security setups in the real world and in a realistic fantasy world, or internally consistent one, are not that good. They are built under strain, limited resources, limited capabilities. Once again, artificial stupidity or routines, security gaps. So unless you are sort of building the ultimate impregnable vault, which you should absolutely do for one adventure or two, you should build something that has multiple ways on it, into it, multiple angles, and also which is sort of open-ended enough for the players, particularly thief players, to develop their own strategies to defeat. You don't have to think of every option. That's their duty. You just build your mousetrap and let them loose to deal with it. One more thing that I think important, there is a very good book called The Burglar's Guide to the City. It is written by an architectural blogger, and it gives a great insight into how a thief's mind operates. And here, the primary example is that if you have a security door, a good thief will not go through that door because the door is undefeatable. He will go through the ceiling of drywall, or he will sort of socially engineer the key from somebody, or the key card, or whatever. And it is these open options, open opportunities, which define a good stealth-centric adventure, in my mind.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head. It's all about basically just presuming that there will be bad attempts at security for nearly anything, right? As well as some stuff that's totally not secure at all. But the point is that thieves arose not because somebody wanted to create the class and then felt that they needed to make content for it, but they were the natural method to interact with content that was already being made. So, I mean, people were making dungeons and they were familiar with, verticality in the dungeon, and that was seen as normal to put in. So, I mean, that made the thief a natural antidote to that, or a way to get around verticality that was already being built into the dungeon to take advantage of it. Your traps, etc., your sentries. But with quote unquote building content or designing content with thieves in mind, just put in all of what you would normally put in, but think about that middle ground that Melan was talking about, where there is a security system, but it is imperfect. That is where most dungeon masters are not. It's binary for most dungeon masters. Either there is a perfect security system or none at all. And so that's probably the primary thing, is that sliding scale of competence weighted towards laziness, nothing ever happens mindset, and incompetence.
You can consider steadying of the hill giant chief as a sort of infiltration scenario as well. That, of course, yeah, the giants are tough. They have some battle plans. They have some guard dogs and sentries and even random encounters, but they are still giants. They are stupid. You can exploit their stupidity. You can find a way into the steadying. You can accomplish your goals in the steadying.
Another thing that Melan mentioned earlier was the Thieves World, the Thieves Guild products, and I would just second those. I have all of those, and the mechanical systems, of course, are not D&D per se, but you can usually reverse engineer it without a lot of difficulty, and they are good for presenting scenarios. So if someone is truly thinking like, man, I understand like how to use the random tables in the DMG to create a dungeon and populate it with monsters and traps, but I just don't know how to get a handle on other types of content. I mean, you can usually find that stuff at least in PDF form. And I think that the Different Worlds website still sold some of that stuff in hard copy that they had left over printed from the 80s for pretty cheap. So I mean, you can get that stuff. Yeah, you can still get that stuff for pretty cheap, a lot of it, and just mine that for ideas, or at least to get familiarize yourself with um with kind of the conceptual uses of that type of adventure.
Yeah, that's an important point. Is that these scenarios introduce you to various forms of thievery, espionage, subterfuge, social hacking, kidnapping, information retrieval, and sabotage. And you also have, of course, city adventures, which is another one. But it gives you a lot of pointers for adventure design, and the examples there are good because they sort of have a good internal consistency. They teach you how to set these scenarios up, how to manage them. It's a very good teaching tool, I would say. And again, unlike a lot of old stuff, I think a few years ago it was still available pretty much very cheaply now.
And this is why we talk about campaigns a lot too. I mean, if someone is just using towns as a restocking point, then it's going to be very hard to make all of this stuff work. I mean, you have to be first willing to run a full campaign to where going out to and adventuring in dungeons and wilderness is but a part of the whole. So for most of our listeners, that's going to be something we talked about a lot, and we don't need to go over it again. But just in case anybody's dipping into this on a topical basis who's not familiar with our other content, we're presuming that you are running a campaign and not just running some random modules in sequence.
Maybe one more point I might add here to EOTB's comment is that what is sort of good to look at is to provide scenarios which are set in complex environments. Of course, they don't have to be very complicated. They just have to be complex in a certain way. Identify a target, like, okay, you have to grab that specific item from a noble household or kidnap somebody or what have you, and let the players figure out the environment to their advantage and get to their target any way they can. That's, of course, applicable to all other kinds of adventures as well. But thief-centric adventures are particularly sort of suited for that mindset. And as a GM, you can set up fairly simple scenarios, like I don't know, kidnap somebody from the Viking Jarl's sort of longhouse in the middle of an island swarming with Vikings, and with that simple, seeing a few locations, you get yourself a perfect adventure that your players will really get a kick out of. It will be player driven and it will be a lot of fun. You can, one thing I like to do in my games is that the small sci-fi episodes are very easy to improvise. And yeah, you can spin off a random encounter into some bit of subterfuge and skullduggery very easily.
And they do dovetail nicely into the training system in AD&D, as far as who you're getting trained by. Well, they probably want you to do something, right? And what
this gave me a mental image of the Thieves Guild monopolizing the gyms in town and sort of skimming off the training costs.
Yeah, I mean, I had Josh's assassin go around in our game, and you can add this if you want, Josh. I don't know if you're going to, but I basically had the Thieves Guild using him as a tool to progress their own needs. And I basically be like, and I based all those off of what was going on in the world, like what was happening with the time passaging, and what was going on with sometimes it would just basically be off rumors. I'd just go and I'd roll up a rumor. I'd be like, okay, this is going to be the mission. I wouldn't put a whole lot of I wouldn't sit there and agonize over making a complex maze about it. But the other thing, why I kind of hesitate to open it up and say this is the way, is that these are generally better suited to just the thief/assassin players. This isn't something that you generally want to do when you have 6 other people around the table that are waiting for you to sneak into a place to infiltrate or whatever. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes, you can have a whole gang of people go in, like the hospital mission I did. But sometimes it's you sneaking into a cultist house in the middle of town while he's going down to his basement to do secret rituals and then ambushing him through the window, right?
Yeah, and I think, that was part of the reason that I kind of wanted to bring up the missions, is because I feel like those thief side quests or assassin side quests, right, where it's like maybe you or one other person kind of going off and doing something, just opens up like a whole new kind of way of engaging with the game that I found was like really, really fun, really enjoyable.
I basically used it as a way to get rumors that were happening on the rumor tables, or things that were newly happening in the world based on your actions, kind of circling back, because I didn't mind doing a side session with you for like an hour and a half or an hour or whatever. I just don't know how to, because I just kind of made it up, so I don't know how to give people advice on it.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like there's probably some stuff that we could go over for it. I mean, for me, I kind of think about what the function of it was. Earlier we were talking about how thieves and assassins are kind of like a window into other parts of the world, and that was a huge part of the assassin missions. Was that they became not just something where I was like doing this assassin, getting training costs, whatever, but they gave us information about the world that fueled how we interacted with it then when we got back to the main sessions, right? Where we were going, what we were targeting, what we were doing was all getting kind of based off of that information that had been gathered. So it becomes like this kind of macro exploration thing as well that was, I think, really adds a lot to the game, and really made the class like extremely unique for me.
But it was, remember, this is all based off of stuff that was either events that would be on the rumor table or events that happened because of stuff that you guys did. And that's how the campaign kind of unfolds naturally anyway. The only difference, I would say, arguably, is that one, it gave you a window into the seedier back alley players of the campaign world, and the different contexts that you met and the different goals that the guilds had. So it basically sent you your W-2 in the mail, but it did it electronically this time. It was you got the same thing and it achieved the same thing, but I just kind of I plugged it in a different way. Because if there was no thieves and assassins, then eventually that would have been rolled up on a table, or the event would have happened, and it may have been discovered by a party without a thief. and it would have fed into each other. But I think that the distinction is that by having guilds that have their own political goals, they learn of something that happened. There's something going on in this town. They know that you're in that area. They definitely have an interest in this being resolved in a certain way, so they task you with it. And I want to be very careful that this is all emergent stuff, right? This is all stuff that you can't sit there at the beginning of a campaign and write up 50 of these things. You got to kind of have to be able to flow with the direction of how the game's going, and take into account what is the people that the thief or the assassin is working for think about these things that you're discovering from play or finding on your rumor table, and how can it plug in? Do they care? Because if they don't care, they're not going to give you a mission for it, right? Maybe they have a client that cares, right? You got to have to think a little bit more critically about it. But the idea that it is something that was facilitated, number one, by the fact that this was a living, breathing world, things were changing, and this plugged cleanly into it, was one aspect. But the other aspect is that, like, logically, most of those things only happen with 1 to 2 players. The other thief player had their own mission too that we had to do before a session. And if you can logically find time to resolve that with the 1 or 2 players that are going to be involved at sometimes, then I say go for it. But if you have a group that's going to be, there's going to be 6 of you sitting around the table, then I'd probably be more hesitant of doing, like, well, this is a place that only a thief can really infiltrate. 3 of you are going to have to stand outside and wait. That how exciting is that for the whole table? So that's kind of like a consideration, right? That's not always the case. I would say that probably your job gets a little bit harder in facilitating those. So I haven't really given a lot of thought on how to structure advice for it. It's, like I said, it's just something I did.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to speak to kind of what you're saying. You were kind of talking about how a lot of the stuff we were doing was based off of the rumor encounter tables, that kind of stuff, right? Or the rumor tables, and that it kind of would have came up anyways. And I think that in some ways that's true. At the same time, getting the information from the assassin mission meant that I feel like the injection point was different, right? Because typically, if I was just getting a rumor, right, like let's take the where at situation, for instance, if I just got that rumor, hey, there's this stuff going on here, that's cool, but I am going into it with relatively limited information, right? Whereas in the assassin mission, we ran the one, I ran into Detronus, right, who had firsthand experience with it, with like the were rat layer, and then we were able to make kind of more calculated decisions, it felt like, and have a more detailed idea. So I feel like it does change the context, and gives like a real feeling of, okay, we actually are able to get more useful information, more actionable information. So I think that there definitely is a difference, and I think that is like a good starting model. Or if someone wanted to try it, I feel like that would totally be a good model to use for it. I'm sure there's other really good ways of
A lot
doing
of what
it
I
as
tried to
well.
do is I have like a rough timeline of how things are going to progress naturally in the world, right? And then I have, if the players ignore this, then this is what's going to happen. For example, Castona getting a monthly attack from the hobgoblins from the desert. That was like a thing that was going to happen, and I was going to have to resolve every single month. And you guys ignored it long enough, and that town has been lost, right? So having all these things that kind of feed together and work together in the world, I try to make sure that, and this is broader campaign talking, is that I try to make sure that it's all discoverable and it all makes sense within the context of a full party. The difference and the distinction with an assassin and a thief that's being fed information or being tasked for a service from their guilds is that you get a little bit extra context about it, right? So whereas like the rumor table, you might hear that there's a slime lord that is commanding this cavalry unit over in Raven's Reach. Rumor is that he eats people or something, right? And the party's like, I don't know, that doesn't sound as cool as the ziggurat, right? the lizard man ziggurat, or the frogman ziggurat, or the swamp witch, or the ghoul keep, or whatever, right? The Tower of Exiles. But as the Thief Guild hears about it, and they're like, there's this thing going on, and it's in our best interest that Raven's Reach military actually succeeds in this campaign that they're on, and this guy's actually a problem. We need you to eliminate him. Then you go in there and you don't know what you're walking into. And then, you kind of find out about it. But in going through it, you learned a lot about Raven's Reach when you were there. You learned about what this guy actually was. You found out what this guy was doing, how he did it. You found out about the were-rats. There's a lot of things that kind of chain together. And I think that's important in general for a campaign. But with a thief, I think that you kind of get a more stitched together view, because you get more motivations behind things, right? But that's not strictly a thing. I think that it's just more common with it.
Right. Well, and then when you're operating just as a thief, that's kind of what I was saying before of how the game kind of changes, right? You're having to engage with things in a way that kind of, you're having to use more soft skills and not just necessarily get into like combat situations, which I really like combat. But at the same time, I think when you're, being a thief, having to sneak, having to do the world interaction where you're interacting with NPCs, right? It becomes really valuable from a game perspective, because then you're in more situations where you're going to be able to make contacts with people, right?
And let me remind you, speaking of the combat, you guys never fought him.
That's true. Yeah.
You guys were underneath his keep that was full of all these military people on his grounds, right? And you had procured a poison from the gnomes that you basically spiked his drink with, and that's how you dealt with them.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really cool stuff. And I mean, I guess I personally just wanted to add that question about the missions, because I do think that it's something that is really valuable, and I would love to see people like explore it more. And I just wanted to put that information out
Melan,
there.
if we rewind the clock back about 15 minutes, Melan said something that was very key, is that it's very easy that when you're designing content for your campaign, sometimes you kind of get carried away and you try to make it convoluted and as interesting as possible. I think the way Melan said it is like, it doesn't have to be that complex. You basically just a scenario, resolve it.
So maybe more effort should go into the environment than the scenario. The scenario can be very, very simple and straightforward, and all the complexity comes from environmental interaction.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said there too for, when the player's interacting with that stuff, they don't have the perfect information, right? A DM can look at a situation and say, okay, this scenario is kind of basic, but there's just a whole nother level of complexity that's added, because, the PCs who are engaging with it aren't going to have perfect information. So they don't know necessarily what the extent of, the context, the content is.
There's something else which I believe is important. And here we see a rather big difference between the way the classic adventure gaming model works and quite a lot of the OSR model works. Is that the OSR has hyper-focused on the procedural level and running adventures on the procedural level. This is important. This is very good, because this sort of structured gameplay is very rewarding. It has loops, and it sort of gives solid game structures that work very well. But here we move into a sort of more open-ended complex simulation model, where there are no concrete, or let's say the procedures of play are more haphazard. They are more open-ended. You have more options to attack a problem, and there are more ways sort of things can get resolved. So what you get is sort of player agendas and the logic of the world sort of colliding with each other, and producing some sort of interesting play dynamic. And one more thing that I would add to this is that a lot of this unfolds more on the campaign level than the individual session level. Like there's a rhythm that to this sort of action that goes from adventure to adventure. You might have sessions which are sort of low intensity and focused on doing recon, setting things up, getting ready for stuff, dealing with sort of information gathering. And these are typically not very rewarding in terms of GP-based experience points. And then you go to the raid, sort of what you might call the raid sessions, which are, we go, okay, we hit this, we realize our plan, and then the winnings are big, and things are just a bit sort of more intense, more fast paced. And there's a sort of up and down, wavy structure as the campaign itself progresses.
If you remember the online game, Josh, that's I think it was session 2 or 3, when you went up to the Salt Keep, and there was the disguised group of people that was really only one person that you had to meet with to get acclimated to the guild, and then you guys went around the other side of the mountain range to talk to the grassland bandits to try to get them hired to go assault the church. And there wasn't really much in the way of action that setting. As a matter of fact, I think that there was like a barrow mound hit towards the end of the session, and that was it. But that probably set up about 11 sessions of content.
Oh yeah, no, people are giving me shit for it in the moment, right? Because we were doing all this information gathering, but in my mind, it just paid off so much to where, yeah, it led to this giant raid that we did on the church, right? Hiring the bandits, getting them to fight against the other bandits, and I mean, yeah, that was an incredibly memorable set of
which
sessions,
led to
for
the
sure.
ziggurat, which led to the swamp witch.
Yeah, there is nothing like a plan coming together at the right moment.
I like that I didn't have a plan at all for this, because I figured they were going to go straight to a totally different place, and they didn't, and that's cool. Just like with that assassination mission with the poison, I just put like a cute little item in the gnome village that basically lets you play dead if you drink it, and they used that on him. So he was like playing, he was temporarily, he was mostly dead, all the way dead, and then they just finished him off.
I just wanted to say really quick, all of that, it was great because, in these type of games, we're not necessarily looking for like a narrative, right? But there's a certain thing that happens when you have more context where it kind of starts to focus the game and the direction of the game, where you're still having meaningful choices, right? Stuff is still open. You can still do whatever you want, but the actions you're taking have like a direct focus to them, that makes it kind of gain this momentum that I think makes it very enjoyable. It makes you consistently excited for the next session and seeing how things are going to unfold. So.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's one of where my mind is also at right now, is that you sort of hand out opportunities that the players can grab and turn to their advantage, and also temptations, things that draw them in, especially for thieves. The Temple of the Spider God, and the Idol and the Gemstones, that kind of content that is irresistible to a thief.
Oh yeah, I mean, just look at the very basic example. Is that there's a statue and it has gems in its eyes. I don't know any thief player that does not want to just start scrabbling up that statue and start prying up.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, so I guess at this point, do y'all have any real like additional comments, any other misconceptions you want to address, or maybe I know we talked about the Thieves Guild stuff a little bit. Maybe there are like resources that you'd want to direct people towards that we can put in the show notes.
I think linked the Thieves World stuff, right?
Yeah, I shot over a link to where people can buy a lot of that content that Melan and I were talking about is still available for ridiculously low prices. Those are hard copies. That's the prices for hard copies. So if people have not picked up any of that stuff before, then I would suggest checking it out.
Furthermore, Chaosium's Cities, which has actually been discussed fairly thoroughly on the server, so thanks to Trent Foster here, That's another big discovery. I wasn't aware of it. I just grabbed it a few weeks ago. It's a great resource that you can get for pennies on Drive-Thru RPG. Very useful. And of course, if you don't have City State of the Invincible Overlord yet, you should get City State of the Invincible Overlord. I mean, that's elementary.
Awesome. All right. Well, do y'all have any final comments?
I do not.
We left it all on the field.
I think we said everything. Which, by the way, if you haven't played the Thief games, it does a real good job making you feel like you're skulking around as a thief. I mean, and you don't want to get in direct combat because most of the time you're just going to get your ass beat. I mean, it's you're putting out torches and stuff. It's fun. It's old, but it's fun.
Yeah, it's of course, it's a solo game, and it's an action game, so it doesn't really work completely like a role-playing game, but it works very close to one in many respects. And it teaches you how to be an effective thief player. And if you look at it more critically or more analytically, it also teaches you how to be a good thief-centered GM.
Yeah, hell yeah. We definitely recommend people to go check that out. I played the game a little bit and it's definitely great. And Melan, haven't you made a good amount of content for that game?
Oh yeah, sure. Quite a lot of missions. The thief mission scene is very old, going back to the late 1990s. I think there are now over maybe 1,006 or 700 missions, maybe more than that. Some of them are great. I particularly recommend the Black Parade. Some autists, some incredibly crazy people made a whole new game on the Thief 1 engine, a complete set of levels. So after you play the base game, you should play that as well. It's absolutely high quality stuff, completely free. Check it out.
Awesome. All right. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and leave it. Thank you guys for coming. It was great. I'm super excited to get this out there.
Well, I hope I delivered on my promise for one banger of an episode. I hope there's plenty of valuable details in there that you can use in your campaigns and at your table. I'll sign off with just saying, get out there to the Mythmere Games website, back that Osric 3.0. It's going to be an amazing launch. Go check out Fight On It Magazine 16 and hop on over to the Discord and chat with us. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.